turning the tables on woke indoctrination and intimidation on campus. That's exactly what Charlie Kirk was doing over these last years, going onto university campuses and literally turning the tables on them. He would be asking and inviting the woke characters on university campuses to come to the table, gave them a mic, prove me wrong. And everyone from atheists, transgenders, communists would come along and try and prove him wrong, and he would turn the tables on them. Now, how can we do that? If we've got, whether at the workplace or in our family, maybe at some dining room tables, we sometimes have our woke relative trying to give us nonsense. Well, what we're going to try and do tonight is show how you can deal with indoctrination, intimidation, and turn the tables on them. Plato said over 2,400 years ago, the price of apathy towards public affairs is to be ruled by evil men. So when you get people saying, I'm not interested in politics, well, politics is very interested in you. And saying, I'm not interested in politics doesn't change the fact that you have to pay taxes and you've got to obey the laws that whatever politicians are there have made. Whether it is you're not allowed to breathe oxygen, you've got to put some dangerous, untested so-called vaccine into your body. They determine even that you're not allowed to work, you're not allowed to run your business, you've got to bankrupt yourself, you've got to stay home, even if it's in some little corrugated iron shack and in the middle of summer and heat. No, you've got to stay there all day. And that they can infringe. So people might have said, I'm not interested in politics. Okay, but politics is interested in you, and it's not going to change the fact that they could take your tax money and use it to indoctrinate kids. They can use it to kill babies through abortion. So people who say, I don't want any interest in politics are being actually quite stupid. If you don't want to be interested in public affairs, you will be doomed to be ruled by evil men. And they are using toxic terminology in their war on free speech. He who defines the word often wins the argument. So you've got to know the words that you're dealing with. Don't you like you're dealing with here? Everything from safe spaces to clutch your pearls, diversity quota, wage gap myth, censorship, and who knows how many other S's out there. And we've got to fight back with truth. Have you ever had the frustrating experience of trying to communicate with someone who seems triggered by the words you use into jumping into conclusions which condemn you for things you never even thought to say? So you saying you want mothers to be executed for having had an abortion? Nobody said that. Why did it prompt that? Oh, so you're a Nazi. You want to gas every Jew in the world. No, nobody said that. Oh, so you want all Muslims to be kicked out of the country. We didn't say that. But they will jump to conclusions. They will damn you to hell for. So you're saying that just because some poor person who's trying their very best in the middle of the Congo, who's never heard of Jesus, that he can't go to heaven, he's got to go to hell just because he didn't hear the gospel? Well, actually, there's far more Christians in the Congo than there are in Belgium. There's 200 times more Christians in the Congo than there are in Belgium, if you want to do that. But anyway, people come up with the most bizarre things, and I've had no end of nonsense. You're trying to have a decent conversation, and the guy gets triggered. I mean, you use some word and they jump around. For example, in Eastern Europe, you could be explaining one of the parables of Jesus. There was a man who had 100 sheep, and he left one. Capitalist, exploiter the proletariat. What's he doing with 100 sheep? Literally had this kind of response. People brainwashed in the schools. And you go into college campus, you will get worse responses than that. Have you ever become frustrated at how simple words and concepts can be so hijacked and distorted into the opposite of whatever you intended? Then you suddenly discover how peaceful and tolerant your neighborhood religion is. Can't you just feel the tolerance? And perhaps you've experienced people poisoning the well, so that despite your best intentions, your motives have become not only suspect, but outrageously misconstrued. This poor couple, and these are people in the retirement age, they were dragged down to the police station in England for 80 minutes, interrogated, just because they had the audacity of putting out some gospel literature in a town hall which already had homosexual LGBTQ literature out there. Now, putting out gay literature is all fine, but to put Christian literature out, if you assumed, oh, this is a place where you can display different viewpoints. No. No, this is only for the LGBTQ and so on. In this war of worldviews, words are weapons. Can anyone tell me what SJW stands for? Who's been on the university campuses? SJW, Social Justice Warrior. There's a bunch of people up there who call themselves social justice warriors. And your views are offensive. And we demand you restrict your views. Ideas have consequences. Terminology is not neutral. Be very careful before you get into the World War worldview battles that you don't pick up their terms. Like they will say, you are anti-choice, we're pro-choice. No, we're not saying anti-choice or anything like that. And that's why you've got to define yourself. You pro-censorship. No, we're pro-family. We're not pro-perversion. And so they will try and define the terms. You are anti-choice. We are pro-choice. So we say, no, we are pro-life. Now, we could be kind and call them pro-choice, but I mean, more effectively, the pro-abortion. But again, you set the terms and you will win the debate. So this is a post from the Americans. Since 2016, you have called us deplorables, fascists, Nazis, transphobes, racists, white supremacists. You've hunted us down. You've humiliated us every way possible. You've burned our cities, destroyed our property, burned our elected officials' homes, attempted assassinations on our elected officials. And you think that we are the threat to society? I mean, that's a good point. Romans 3 verse 13 says, their throat is an open tomb. With their tongues they've practiced deceit. The poison of asps, snakes, is under their lips, whose mouth is full of cursing and bitterness. Does this remind you of any people you come across today? Their feet are swift to shed blood. Destruction and misery are in their ways, and the path of peace they have not known. There is no fear of God before their eyes. You could write that over a whole lot of movements today. Noam Chomsky has written the book Manufacturing Deceit on media control. The smart way to keep people passive and obedient is to strictly limit the spectrum of acceptable opinion, but allow very lively debate within that spectrum. In other words, you're not allowed to bring up different subjects, but you can argue within the subjects they've chosen. They have set the agenda. It's prop agenda. And the propaganda is not just propaganda, it's prop agenda. There's only some agendas you're allowed to discuss. In the past, if you wanted to suppress dissent in a church, all you had to do was shout, heresy! And that was sufficient to silence most people, because if you were convicted of heresy, you would be burned at the stake, like Joan of Arc, Jan Hus, for that matter. And if you criticize the state, if you wanted to shut people up, you accused them of treason. Because treason meant you could, go to the gulag under Stalin in the Arctic hellhole and be a slave for the rest of your life, or you could get your head chopped off in the days of someone like Henry VIII, for example. Like you gave birth to a daughter, not a son, off of the head, treason. Treason against the king. Although we now know the male determines the sex of the baby, but nevertheless, that didn't save Anne Boleyn. And, Henry VIII's 6 wives, divorced, beheaded, died. Divorced, beheaded, survived. That's the 6 wives of King Henry VIII. Why anyone would want to get married to King Henry VIII, I have no idea. I mean, that was like a death sentence if you didn't get everything right, including the gender of the baby born, in the case of poor Anne Boleyn. Although her daughter became one of the greatest monarchs Britain's ever had, Queen Elizabeth I. But nevertheless, I mean, that didn't save her mom's life. Today, if you want to shut people up, you say hate speech. That's the modern equivalent of silencing free speech. It's a modern equivalent of treason and heresy in the past. Hate speech is the new treason and heresy. If they want to shut you up, they just accuse you of hate speech. And so Charlie Kirk says the most important thing we can do is to tell the truth boldly. It's strategic, it's important, but it's dangerous to tell the truth. Now, can you believe it? In Great Britain, back in 2020, the Merseyside police in Liverpool put up this poster: being offensive is an offence. And Merseyside police stand with and support the LGBTQI plus community. The plus goes into pedophilia, by the way, the whole lot. We do not tolerate hate speech, hate crime on any level. Stop Hate UK. Now, that doesn't mean you can't scream hate against Christians. That's fine. But if you say anything that could be critical of or evangelistic to in the way that offends the LGBTQ perverts, you will be prosecuted. How do you like this? Outside the train station, these masked thugs in uniform standing with a sign, looking in tactical gear. And this is like George Orwell 1984 stuff. The police standing there, and in Britain, when they have gay pride marches, the police march with gay pride colors and all this, and they've painted police vehicles in gay pride colors in Britain. Christians have been arrested in Britain for what they post on social media, or for evangelizing a homosexual in public. Now, pro-choicers are not actually pro-choice, have you noticed? When it comes to education, the pro-choicers don't believe in choice. You must go to the state school, you must have sex education, you must have LGBTQ, CRT, whatever it is. They don't believe in choice when it comes to education. And if you want to choose Bible-based parental controlled home education, suddenly you find the pro-choicers are against choice. And most pro-choicers are against the choice of medical personnel who choose to be conscientious objectors. So if you've got a doctor, nurse, or pharmacist who doesn't believe in participating in abortion, suddenly you find the pro-choicers don't support choice when it comes to the conscientious objectors. Isn't that amazing? If somebody doesn't want to abuse their healing skills to participate in the taking of an innocent life through abortion, they can get prosecuted. And so do you see the pro-choicers standing up for their choice? A true feminist would fight for the rights of preborn women. What about equal rights for all women, including preborn women? And if abortion is such an acceptable choice, why do photos of abortion make pro-choicers very angry? We've got some pictures of abortion which we take to Parliament because we think we've got to force these parliamentarians to see what they've legalized and what they're using our tax money for. And some of them get so angry at it. Well, if it's so acceptable, why do the pictures make them angry? Now, as an example of newspeak doublethink deception, how's this headline by the Daily Maverick back in 2020? Abortion is healthcare. This makes it a human right. Just think of that doublethink. Authored by Tseleng Mofokeng, who is described as the United Nations Commission on Human Rights Special Rapporteur for Physical and Mental Health. What a mouthful. Aren't you glad you don't have a job description title? It sounds like that. Well, the Daily Maverick identified the article as first published in Section 27's Abortion in Eastern and Southern Africa publication. And just as in George Orwell's dystopian 1984 novel, the Ministry of Truth deals in lies, in disinformation and propaganda. And the Ministry of Peace wages war. And the Ministry of Love engages in torture. And the Ministry of Plenty deals with rationing and ensures starvation and shortages. Political language is designed to make lies sound truthful and murder sound respectable, like collateral damage, saturation bombing, strategic bombing, and so on. I mean, it sounds so much better than incinerating cities and murdering women and children. This UN propaganda piece is a classic of disinformation and inverted reality. The fact is, abortion is recognized as the taking of an innocent life throughout almost every country in Africa, with the notable exception of ANC-ruled South Africa and in the very far north, Tunisia. Only 2 countries in the continent of Africa legalize the killing of babies through abortion. But it's a fact, every abortion stops a beating heart. Abortion is the killing of an innocent human being. Abortion leaves 1 dead and 1 wounded. 1 heart stops, another heart breaks. And all women who've had an abortion suffer severe psychological consequences. And the medical term for this is post-abortion syndrome. It is real. However, according to this UN propagandist, all states in Africa should legalize abortion, which she describes as reproductive health and as a human right. So killing a baby is reproductive health. I mean, how's that for newspeak? I mean, double think. Evidently unconcerned about the right to life of preborn babies, Mofokeng writes of dignity, bodily integrity, equality, safety and security, health, reproductive justice, justice for goodness sakes, freedom to choose. I mean, how's that for newspeak doublethink? And condemns pro-life legislation, which most countries in Africa have, and outlaws abortion throughout almost every country in Africa as oppression and discrimination. So protecting the right to life preborn babies is oppression and discrimination, legalized discrimination, oppression of women, and signals out Malawi, Botswana, and Namibia for laws that seek to punish those who work in abortion services, which we would say who kill babies, but work in abortion services, how's that for a euphemism? Well, in Kenya, when they tried to promote abortion in Kenya, the people rose up with, Africa does not welcome abortion. And ICPD 25 does not represent us. Now, for muddying the waters, for poisoning the well, for weaponizing words, using toxic terminology, this article by Mofokeng is pretty hard to beat. Mofokeng complains about the disconnection of abortion from primary health and sexual and reproductive rights. Primary health. What's primary health about killing babies? She condemns this as systematic anti-choice positions. I mean, this person has really been to a university and brainwashed in how to twist language. Then, ominously, this UN propagandist, Mofokeng, complains about South Africa's Choice on Termination of Pregnancy Act 1996, where she alleges many women in the country are denied access to abortion services on the grounds of moral and religious beliefs of health providers. In other words, pro-choice, conscience objecting, people who've got a conscience. So a doctor or nurse or pharmacist who's got a conscience says, I can't participate in killing of babies. Those people are, in her words, denying women access to abortion services. Apparently, most of South Africa's districts don't have someone willing to do abortions in the medical profession. So evidently, Mofokeng and the UN who finance her do not tolerate conscientious objectors on moral and religious grounds, and they want to criminalize those doctors and nurses and other healthcare professionals like pharmacists who don't want to pervert the healing profession by taking innocent lives through the violence of abortion. Do you see how the choice of words makes all the difference in a debate? And this article is an ominous warning of a concerted effort to not only stigmatize those countries that seek to protect the most innocent life of all from the violence and injustice of abortion, but to criminalize Christian and other pro-life doctors and pro-life nurses and other health professionals like pharmacists from their right to choose to be conscientious objectors when it comes to such a highly contentious, controversial issue as abortion. Abortion is not healthcare. Real healthcare saves lives. In fact, to be honest, a lot of what they call healthcare is sick care. Good food and exercise is healthcare. Pharmaceutical products are in many cases just sick care. But it sounds so much nicer, healthcare, doesn't it? Like pro-choice sounds so much better than abortion, pro-abortion. And a doctor in reproductive health sounds so much better than a doctor who kills babies. It's absolutely vital that we speak up for those who cannot speak for themselves, that we have nothing to do with the fruitless deeds of darkness, but rather expose them. Psalm 94, verse 16, God asks, who will rise up for me against the evildoers? Who will make a stand for me against the workers of iniquity? And that's a question we've got to ask regularly. And of course, this coming Sunday, we are going to have the International Life Change Sunday in Cape Town, where we stand against the national sin of abortion, the abortion holocaust. You can't expect God to bless a country that kills its children. We can sing in Nkosi Sickle Africa all we like, but God does not bless child sacrifice. Abortion doesn't make you unpregnant. Abortion makes you the mother of a dead baby. Abortion is not a human right, it is human sacrifice. And the scripture commands us, rescue those being led away to death. Hold back those staggering towards slaughter. Abortion is murder, and we parked our trailer outside the Cape Town High Court to make a stand. And sometimes we've taken it up to University of Cape Town in order to make the stand that life begins at conception and abortion is murder. We march for life every 1st of February every year, march to Parliament to make a protest against the legalization of abortion on the anniversary of the legalization of abortion in this country. And on the first Sunday in October, we join about 1 million pro-lifers worldwide in 1,700 locations who make a stand across their city or at key junctions in their city against the killing of babies. And we've been doing this since 1992. My first child, Andrea, was only 1 year old when she took part in the first pro-life chain, and she was in a backpack on my back while I was handing out gospel lectures at the traffic lights. Although we never got pictures at that stage, it was still early days in our pro-life movement here in Cape Town. But we have been, since 1992, gathering for life chains, distributing gospel literature to vehicles, making sure people hear the message on pro-life. And we're very grateful that they've made this nice pedestrian bridge at the entrance to waterfront right next to Cape Town National Conference Centre, enables us to hang out our banners and posters, and the pedestrian bridge makes an excellent display for Make a Stand for Life. And we'll often have our trailer going around with the different banners and posters and drawing attention. Interestingly, a lot of drivers will hoot and give thumbs up and support what you're doing, but you can see there's some very angry people who shout, swear, and make rude signs at you because you make a stand for life. I mean, who can find it offensive to say that we should choose life so that you and your children may live? Now, some people don't like this verse, but it's from Proverbs. The Lord hates hands that shed innocent blood. Proverbs 6, it's a fact. And ANC stands for abortion, necklacing, and communism, ANC. Babies' lives matter. And so these life chains have mobilized hundreds of Christians over the years to make a stand for life. And this coming Sunday, the 5th of October, from 2 o'clock in the afternoon, we'll be meeting at Burton-Crook Street in Cape Town, right opposite the entrance to waterfront and the Cape Town International Conference Centre. There's a nice big open island with a pedestrian bridge we can use. Now, on the 1st of February, every year we commemorate the legalization of abortion in South Africa. And the closest Sunday to it, which this coming year will be actually the 1st of February, we have a Sanctity Life Sunday when we encourage church pastors to preach on when life begins and what the Bible says about our duty to care for preborn babies. And then on the actual, the first working weekday of February, we will march to Parliament. Now, this year, Monday falls on the 2nd of February, and we'll be marching to Parliament. Some people can join the march from Cape Provincial University of Technology. We start the march from there to Parliament. Others can join us at 1 o'clock at the gates of Parliament if they work in town, and that's the only time they can get free. And we have a National Day of Repentance prayer vigil outside Parliament. We've also noticed many who proclaim themselves to be pro-choice, declaring, my body, my choice. They didn't believe in choice when it came to the mandatory wearing of masks. So, interesting, those who normally supported freedom to protest when it involved Black Lives Matter or Antifa, looting shops, burning buildings, rioters throwing rocks and Molotov cocktail petrol bombs at police, they supported those so-called protests when there were riots. But they opposed the right of the hospitality industry in Cape Town to peacefully protest against the unconstitutional lockdowns, or for the rights of citizens to protest the draconian lockdown laws in the name of combating a virus. So we weren't allowed to march to protest against the masks or the vaccines or anything like that. But you could riot. Rioting was fine during 2020, but you weren't allowed to protest peacefully. We've witnessed an unprecedented war against freedom of speech, which has been well documented by a whole spate of books. Freedom of speech is under attack. And you've noticed that pathological liar Keir Starmer, the first Marxist atheist Prime Minister of Britain, he said in the presence of President Donald Trump, of course we have freedom of speech in England. We invented free speech. Well, both statements aren't true. Yes, Britain did invent free speech, but it doesn't have it right now. So for him to pretend that there's no problem with freedom of speech in Great Britain today is just not true. People are getting arrested for just expressing opinion. They arrested a granny for praying silently across the street from an abortion clinic. Policeman walks up and says, "Are you praying?" "Yes." "Why do you ask?" "What were you praying about?" "Does it matter?" "Yes, you are within whatever distance it was from the abortion clinic, and it's against the law for you to do so." They arrested her for praying silently. She didn't even have a placard or poster like we would have. She wasn't even making a scene outside the door of the clinic. She was praying on the other side of the road, but she was in a no-pray zone in Great Britain. Not just freedom of speech at stake, freedom to pray is at stake. Many of those who claim to be for freedom of speech actually oppose freedom of speech on college campuses, on social media. I don't know if you can remember, but when I was growing up, liberals and leftists were against censorship. Do you remember? All censorship is wrong. But once pornography got legalized, suddenly they were for censorship to stop free speech and people praying and things like that. And when it comes to pro-life, pro-family, pro-marriage, creation science, those who are against unconstitutional lockdowns or any other politically incorrect position, suddenly the free speeches are for censorship. And today, it's the liberal left, the radical woke crowd that are for censorship. And they will argue for it. They won't use the word censorship, but that's what they mean. They'll say, banning hate speech or unacceptable speech or whatever. They use different words. Many liberals who claim to be tolerant strenuously oppose any tolerance for pro-lifers, for homeschoolers, for those who oppose mandatory vaccinations. I mean, they called us anti-vaxxers. Well, it's not so much that we're anti-vax, we're against government mandating of any medical procedure. And those of us who refuse to wear masks and were convinced that the lockdown regulations were unconstitutional, or anyone who had a different view to that, the radical loony left, suddenly they've got no tolerance for them. Plato said over 2,400 years ago, "Strange times are these in which we live, when old and young are taught falsehoods in school, and the person that dares to tell the truth is called at once a lunatic and a fool." You're a lunatic and you're a fool if you disagree with it. Everyone knows evolution is a fact. Everyone knows that the vaccines are safe and effective. And no right person would disagree that. And they continually redefine everything so that you can't question it. When they say don't question the science, but that is science. Science is to question everything. Science begins with measurement. If you can't measure it, it's not science. It's just ideology. And they couldn't measure. And now RFK Jr.'s bring out the fact that they had no science behind the social distancing, no science behind the masks. And in fact, the vaccines didn't save lives, they cost lives. Tens of thousands of people died out of complications to the vaccines, including my own brother-in-law, who was forced by his work to get a vaccination. He walked 2 steps, collapsed into a coma, and died within a week. So my poor sister had to attend my wife's funeral on a Monday and her husband's funeral on the Friday. But it's not just that. We've heard at stores many people coming to South Africa who know of elders, members of their family and so on, who killed over and died as a result of the vaccine. There's no one-size-fits-all injection or procedure that suits every person on earth. People have different reactions. And so to mandate something is insane. And they were telling pregnant mothers it's safe and effective. How would they know? There hadn't been enough time to measure the results on pregnant women or babies. And they were injecting babies with these things. It's insane. And as Donald Trump's now revealed, there's been things like mercury and aluminium in vaccines. For goodness sakes, who in their right mind puts mercury and aluminium into some child's bodies? What kind of sick sadists do that sort of thing? Well, they've got mountains of them in Big Pharma. Aristotle said tolerance and apathy are the last virtues of a dying society. Tolerance, without concern for what you're tolerating. There's some good things to tolerate. But I've been a fireman, and I tell you, we are taught to be very intolerant of fire hazards. We do workplace surveys when there wasn't much fires on the go. Sometimes we'd be going around and inspecting the amount of places that you'd find, including hospitals, where the fire doors, the fire escape doors are padlocked with a chain. Where's the key? They have no idea. What's going to happen in emergency if you've got to evacuate? That's why you have these fire doors here. You go into hospitals like Red Cross Children's Hospital. I've been there many a time because my son had a kidney transplant. I visit the place sometimes 5 times a day. And they've got these fire doors that must stay shut. And they've got big signs on them, must stay shut at all times. And they've got springs to make sure it always closes. And you'd go there and you could see people had put a brick or something to prop them open. You know, because they're coming with trolleys and maybe they're finding it more convenient to have these doors open. But in any building, a fire can destroy the entire building if every door is open. If every door is open, 20 minutes, the entire building is finished, kaput, gone. And we've got actual examples where there's been documented, like Quest of Intermissions Auditorium, which of course had no doors. It was one big building. 20 minutes, gone. You couldn't save it. Now, that's why hotels and hospitals must have fire doors that are mandatorily shut with springs. So if you go through it, must shut. So I'd walk through and I'd kick the brick out the way and these doors would shut, which is what they're meant to be. And then you came back and somebody's put a handwritten note over this door must stay closed all the time. Please do not close these doors, you know. And so they would supersede this. Well, the fire brigade would go in and find things like that, or some places where you've got a wooden staircase and all kinds of flammable paints and newspapers piled up under the fire escape, which is made of wood. That's a fire hazard. We were taught to be intolerant to that sort of thing. People putting extremely volatile, flammable materials right by wall sockets. I don't know if you've seen, sometimes a flame can come out of these wall sockets, unless you've got the right kind of surge protectors on them. And so, again, you've got to be intolerant of fire hazards because lives are at stake. Doctors should be intolerant of disease. Police should be intolerant of crime. You should think government should be intolerant of corruption and so on. Although, did you hear what the General Secretary of the ANC said recently? If we were to take corruption seriously, he said, there wouldn't be a person left in the whole of Parliament. He said, maybe just the tea lady at Latuli House, but she's probably stolen a few bags of sugar. Quote, unquote. Okay, we're all doing it, but so what? You know, that kind of thing about corruption. And then we had an ANC leader who once said, corruption hurts no one. It's a victimless crime, which is about as stupid a comment as you could say. Corruption hurts absolutely everyone. They've stolen trillions of rands. Every year, over R1 trillion gets stolen by government corruption. And that's according to the African Union's Task Force on Corruption. So tolerance and apathy are the last virtues of a dying society. And A.K. Chesterton once said, societies are far gone in depravity when toleration is considered good in itself without regard to the thing being tolerated. Tolerating evil and perversion is evil. Thomas Paine once said, he who dares not offend cannot be honest. And that's the main thing about the woke nonsense today. We have people pretending not to be offended or trying not to offend, but the only way you can do that is if you're not honest. A pastor who doesn't offend anyone is not preaching the gospel or the whole counsel of God. A journalist who's not exposing corruption and evil in society and the hypocrisy of the leaders is not doing his job, and so on. George Orwell, who was once a journalist, to understand George Orwell and why he's so prophetic, he was once a convinced communist. He was once very enthusiastic supporter of Joseph Stalin. He was a policeman. He was a propagandist for the BBC during the Second World War. So this is why he knows, and he writes with the intensity he does. And he says, journalism is printing what someone else does not want printed. Everything else is public relations. So to say that journalist offended someone, well, that's his job. If he's going to be honest, somebody's going to be offended. So what? That's what a free society is meant to do. Those who support the hate speech bill, which doesn't even attempt to deal with genuine hate speech of Antifa or BLM or LGBTQ or communist revolutionaries or the radical Islamic jihadists. They don't deal with real hate speech. Like, Europe is the cancer, Islam is the answer. Exterminate those who slander Islam. Does that sound like hate speech to you? No, of course not. That's not hate speech. Behead those who insult Islam. No, that's free speech. That's not hate speech. However, in the name of combating hate speech, most of these liberal left radicals seek to suffocate free speech of Christians who want to oppose or even question the politically correct radical revolutionary agenda. Their goal is corrupt and conquer. I mean, just think, Charlie Kirk was demonized and murdered because of free speech. He questioned the narrative on the very hallowed soil of the universities, where how dare any Christian conservative utter anything other than the mandatory mantras that every leftist has to parrot. And so it's corrupt and conquer. And to many today, non-racialism means promoting racial policies, race quotas, race hatred, even race quotas for sports teams, for goodness sakes. It turns out that those screaming racist, the loudest, are the worst racists of all, like Julius Malema is just an obvious example. Black Lives Matter is not true even to its own slogan. They apparently do not think that Black Lives Matter in Sudan. Our friends are being bombed in the Nuba Mountains of Sudan. They aren't the concern of BLM. BLM is not concerned about black lives in the Congo. It doesn't matter how many millions of people have been slaughtered in the Congo. Their lives do not matter to BLM. BLM doesn't think Black Lives Matter in Zimbabwe. They can be dragged off and beaten up by their own police regularly. No problem. They still support ship all aid you can to the dictators who are murdering their citizens. BLM do not think that Black Lives Matter in Nigeria, where 17,000 Christians were murdered in 5 years by Boko Haram, 1,000 church attacks. No, Black lives in Nigeria do not matter because they're Christian. And it doesn't matter in Chicago street gangs either. BLM does not even think that Black lives matter in the womb because BLM supports abortion. You can go onto their own website. They support abortion. And today in America, almost as many black children are aborted as are born. It's about 50%. 1 in 2 black babies conceived in America are aborted. It's the highest abortion rate in the world. And BLM went out of their way to support Kermit Gosnell, America's worst serial killer, who was the third trimester abortionist, who was killing babies outside the womb, which even in New York was illegal at that time. You know, he wasn't a very good doctor. He charged people a lot of money. He made $1.8 million in 1 year. That was what he got out of what the prosecutors called a house of horrors. And in one night, he could make from $10,000 to $15,000 from abortion, and huge amounts of abuse that he did. And he would have the babies born and then cut the backs of their necks, the spinal cord, literally. So it was what they called partial birth abortion. But it was infanticide. The baby was outside the womb and murdering the baby. And Kermit Gosnell got financial support from BLM, one of the worst mass murderers in history. And then you look at the difference between how BLM dealt with what they perceived as injustice and how Charlie Kirk's supporters changed it. So look at the George Floyd Memorial with Molotov cocktail petrol bombs and the Charlie Kirk Memorial with candles and prayer vigils. It's not the same. Are you being called a racist? Honestly, who cares anymore? I certainly don't. That word has been overused to the point of losing all meaning. Absolutely irrelevant. And it's true. Apparently, most black lives do not matter to BLM. BLM really stands for burn, loot, murder, or Baal, Lucifer, and Moloch. George Orwell's dystopian 1984 novel now seems ominously prophetic. Big Brother's watching you. Have you noticed Britain's now trying to enforce digital ID? And first published 1948, George Orwell's 1984 envisaged a future with an omnipresent government surveillance. Big Brother is watching you. And public manipulation through mass media and the cult of worshipping the party leader. And his historic revisionism, rewriting history, intimidation, and social engineering. And all this no longer looks like a joke. I mean, this looks like, how did he know? Well, he was a communist, he was a propagandist, he understood what was coming. In George Orwell's 1984 novel, he warned of the coming newspeak, where words are hijacked to further totalitarian agenda of the revolutionaries. And Orwell predicted thought crimes punished by thought police. And that's where we are now. You're not allowed to think that. I mean, basically, it's a thought crime. You didn't do anything wrong, but you thought something wrong. And those who question the newspeak of Big Brother are guilty of thought crimes, which will be prosecuted by the thought police. You had a little bit too much to think. Closed minds stop thought crimes. If thought corrupts language, language can corrupt thought. The Ministry of Peace ensures perpetual war. The Ministry of Truth uses lies and propaganda, mini-truth, to distort all information in the news and entertainment and in the arts. The people will believe what the media tells them they believe. I mean, how many people do you come across with, they'll come out with some outrageous comments. And where did you get that from? Well, it's the media. People will say outrageous things about people and places they know nothing about, or even eras in history that they've never studied. But they believe it because I saw with my own eyes on television, which are contradiction terms. The Ministry of Truth would also vaporize or expunge from the public record any opponents of the state that they couldn't debate or argue against. These would become unpersons who would disappear down the memory hole. Well, what do they call it now? Deplatformed or shadow banned. The Ministry of Love, or mini-love, would orchestrate the 2 minutes hate and the hate week campaigns to distract and channel the anger and frustration of masses towards a real or imagined enemy. And we've seen this up at University of Cape Town. They'd suddenly have their 2 minutes hate campaigns against Rhodes. Rhodes must fall. And then they had their hate week. Everything, Rhodes must fall. Well, he is the founder of the university, How unreasonable. They've got a statue to the man who bought this place, paid for it, and founded this university. Why would you do that? And these guys are so traumatized, they couldn't study at the university with a statue of the man who had paid for and built their university. And so they had hate week campaigns. Absolutely bizarre. And these slogans epitomize the Ministry of Truth. War is peace. Ignorance is strength. Slavery is freedom. The most effective way to destroy people is to deny and obliterate their own understanding of their history. Who controls the past controls the future. Whoever controls the present controls the past, meaning they can rewrite history books. As Karl Marx declared, the first battlefield is the rewriting of history. And Karl Marx's people have been busy rewriting history, so that almost anything you know about in history is twisted now to the perspective of what the present elite want you to believe. Whether it's true or not, you can be pretty sure it's not true. So George Orwell writes, every record has been destroyed or falsified, every book rewritten, every picture's been repainted, every statue, every street building has been renamed, every date has been altered, and the process is continuing day by day, minute by minute. History has stopped. Nothing exists except an endless present in which the party is always right. That's one of the titles of a Solzhenitsyn book. We never make mistakes, quote unquote. That's from the party, because see, the party is God. The party is infallible. Not just an infallible pope in a Catholic church, but there's an infallible party in a communist country. Everything faded into mist. The past was erased. The erasure was forgotten. The lie became truth. Enemies of the revolutionary state will be vaporized. They'll become unpersons. They'll disappear down the memory hole. Just think how Mark Zuckerberg admitted later before Congress, he had deplatformed 2 million people and removed over 20 million posts just in 2020. And he said he did it because the CIA and the FBI asked him to do it. So much for freedom of speech. And I experienced it too. There were things I posted which had huge followings. Next thing it's disappeared. Next thing, nobody's seeing anything I post. And shadow banning and all this is real. So much for freedom of press. Political language is designed to make lies sound truthful and murder sound respectable. If liberty means anything at all, it means the right to tell people what they do not want to hear. That's what freedom of speech is. But the further a society drifts from truth, the more it'll hate those who speak the truth. Truth is hate to those who hate the truth. Charlie Kirk peacefully debated with people he disagreed with, but the left murder people they disagree with. We're not the same. Wokeness is a mind virus. And have you noticed how Marxists call their violent riots protests? I can't believe how many stupid, dishonest journalists we've got who call a riot a protest. And they speak about protesters burning this and looting that. That's not a protest. That's anything violent by definition is not a protest. It's now a riot. They call the murder of babies choice. They call perversion an alternative lifestyle. Well, that sounds nice, doesn't it? They call their hate speech politically correct. They call their racism diversity. Yeah, like stabbing some unsuspecting pedestrian who's just sitting before you, a Ukrainian refugee in this case, Irina Zaruska, stabbed in the neck by some psychopath who had been arrested and released 14 times by some pathetic woke judge. And on a public transport, stabbed to death, left to die in her own blood with the passengers around doing nothing. They call their intolerance tolerance. They call their violence mostly peaceful protest. Did you see it during the 2020 BLM riots in Minnesota? A CNN reporter standing in front of the burning police station and called them mostly peaceful protest. I mean, it's a parody now. I mean, people just laugh at this, that they can lie with a straight face. Mostly peaceful protests. Well, you could call the Second World War mostly peaceful bombings or something, really. They call the looting of flat screen TVs a protest. Same thing with looting Nike stores. They label your free speech hate speech and a thought crime. The only slavery that seems to matter to the radical left is the slavery that ended 2 centuries ago. And I won't tell you who ended it, because that would be pro-Christian. I mean, it's Christians who ended the slave trade 2 centuries ago. But they don't have any interest in opposing the slavery today, like in Red China, Mauritania, Saudi Arabia. This is considered irrelevant. It's not worthy of any attention that most of the goods we get made in China is probably made by slave labor. Or what's going on in Mauritania, or in the Middle East with enslaving young women. The BLM co-founder was convicted of human trafficking. By the way, that's a modern term for slavery. Human trafficking is slavery. So Ferguson BLM leader Charles Wade was arrested in 2016 for 7 counts of human trafficking. That's slavery, including that of underage girls. So he is a pedophile pervert and a slave trader. So these guys are all upset about the slavery that ended 200 years ago, but they don't care about the slavery their own people are doing now. If you try to call attention to the desperate plight of black Zimbabweans suffering under brutal Marxist dictatorship, then you may be accused of being a racist. I've had people call me a racist because I care about black Christians suffering in Zimbabwe. If you try to speak up for those who cannot speak for themselves, preborn babies, if you try to advocate the right to life of preborn babies, you will be accused of being anti-choice or even anti-woman, for goodness sakes. Pro-choice is a lie. Babies do not choose to die. You don't have the right to choose anything the left disapproves of, by the way. My body, my choice is what they shout. However, if you choose not to wear a mandatory mask, you may be accused of being guilty of a hate crime. I mean, I've had people shout, where's your mask? At home. I'm walking with my grandson. They live in the same home as me. I don't need a mask walking around my own suburb. Goodness me, at the hysteria of these people, your neighbors phoning the police to inform you. My son was running around an empty soccer field in Pines, and 5 security and police vehicles turned up to arrest him for running alone on an empty field during the lockdown. And then they mobilized helicopters and all sorts of things to find people who were surfing on a beach or fishing on a beach during this lockdown lunacy. Absolutely insane. They wouldn't respond to a home invasion with as much people as they mobilized to catch people who were breathing fresh air during the lockdown. Insanity. Apparently, when it is really your body, you may not have a choice at all. So when I was asked, where's your mask? Sometimes I said, I've got a medical condition. I need to breathe oxygen. Anyone who disagrees with radical revolutionary rhetoric may be accused of being a far-right extremist. Have you ever heard of a far-left extremist? Apparently, even those who believe in murdering their neighbors are not far-left. They might just be left-wing, but you, even if you're moderate and middle of the road, are called a far-right extremist. I mean, you're not just even moderately right-wing. You're a far-right extremist. They go together. It's like a compound noun. Now, those making such judgmental generalizations may be far-left radical extremists, and they're attempting to silence dissent by shouting incendiary slogans. Now, if removing all the guns saves just one life, it's worth it, says the woke left. Well then, if deporting all the illegals will save just one life, wouldn't that be worth it? No, of course not. They don't have logic. All whites are racist is not normally recognized as a racist generalization. Obviously, it is a racist generalization. And by the way, you can PayPal me, this Ashley says, but this critical race theory is it's racism. There's nothing else to call it. And they won't even accept that it's judgmentalism, but of course it is judgmentalism. White people are recessive genetic defects and subhuman. Black people can literally wipe out the white race if we had the power to. And that's a BLM co-founder. How different from Erica Kirk saying that she forgives the person who murdered her husband. I mean, can you really believe that people can say things like this? And then in South Africa, we've got BBBEE, broad-based economic empowerment. Well, the way it works out is, as one economist has pointed out, under BBBEE in South Africa, they have transferred 1 trillion rand to 100 people. 100 people have gotten all the benefits of this 1 trillion rand that's been transferred under BBBE. So it's not that broad at all. It's actually narrow-based elite empowerment, to be honest. And that is racial discrimination, though. Nothing is their fault. To the woke, any criticism of their violent, intolerant racism is dismissed as racism. You point out that they're racist, like you point out that Malem and his EFF crowd singing "Kill the Boer, kill the farmer," that this is racist, and they accuse you of being a racist because you don't support killing of Boer farmers. Does this make any sense? The radical left is no longer willing to discuss or debate. In fact, Charlie Kirk says they can't debate, they cannot even converse anymore. The merits of a case using facts and logic is not something they can handle. They generally choose to shout insults and ad hominem invectives in an aggressive attempt to stifle debate and silence alternative viewpoints. So, you're a moron. You're an idiot. You're not scientific. Well, what does that prove? That's not debate. And then the next thing is, we'll kill you. Did you notice how many people were dancing, singing, posting happy celebrations of the killing of Charlie Kirk? You had some of these people with a megaphone dancing in the street saying, "We got Charlie in the neck, in the neck." I mean, literally, what kind of sick sadists out there celebrate the murder of some husband and father, Christian, who was just exercising free speech in a goal to reach the very kind of people like the one who murdered him? Everything is your fault. It's even Charlie's fault that he got shot. Any attempt to respond to these generalizations and condemnations will be dismissed with, "You're a racist," or "You're judgmental," or some other sort of invective. So what we've got now is temper tantrum tactics. Like spoiled brats, these radicals are resorting to temper tantrum tactics to intimidate and bully others into compliance to the ever-increasingly irrational demands. My feelings, it's the attack of the cry bullies. They want their safe space. To hell with the Constitution, curriculum, logic, reason. I mean, that they can all burn up. They step on everyone else. They don't care about the people they hurt, but they're pampered. And they are special snowflakes. And they leave in their wake destruction. Liberals preach the gospel of victimization. I'm a victim. You are to blame, and nothing is my fault. That's the liberal gospel of victimization. Previously disadvantaged refers to those who received subsidized housing, free medical care, and free education. Previously advantaged refers to those who are overtaxed to pay for free medical care, for free education, subsidized housing, for the millions of migrants pouring into their countries from free liberated countries for opportunities, freedoms, and benefits they couldn't enjoy in their own liberated countries. So, to translate the toxic terminology, white privilege refers to those of us, like me, who were caned at school, conscripted in the army to protect black tribesmen, in my case, Avambo tribesmen in Namibia, from being terrorized by the red freedom fighters, and then taxed to aid the people we were accused of oppressing. So I was too male and too pale under apartheid South Africa back in the 80s to get any subsidies for when I went to college. I needed a full-time job, 6 days a week, 8 hours a night, work in a fire brigade to put myself through theological college. While the previously disadvantaged students got bursaries and they were there for free and they didn't need extra jobs outside of college. And they would sometimes say to me, could you take my sermon on Sunday? I've got an assignment for Monday. Well, I had assignments for Monday too, because I was taking twice as many subjects as the other students. They were doing 4 or 5 subjects a semester. I was never doing less than 8. Once I did 9 subjects a semester. But I ended my college debt-free because I worked my way through. And that's because I had the white privilege of having to work for my studies, whereas the previously disadvantaged got it free. Communists seem to be inoculated against logic. Today we're living in the most intolerant age with the worst racism ever seen in history, when hate speech is mostly propagated by those who claim to be against hate speech, and where free speech is at risk by those who claim to stand for freedom. I mean, just look at Great Britain for an example of the worst hypocrisy out there. But Aldous Huxley also wrote a prophetic book. His book he wrote in the 1930s, similar to George Orwell's 1984, except in this case, he saw the brave new world as a place where people are subdued by drugs and distracted by endless stimulation in a highly technological age, where the government doesn't need to lock you up because they drug you and distract you. And they basically bring out this new world where people are sort of like coming out of test tubes, and you see they're all pill heads. The people are subdued with drugs. So Aldous Huxley's Brave New World was a world where people are subdued by drugs in an increasingly technologically advanced age. And notice the self-flagellation, whipping himself, because, I'm to blame for everything sort of thing. And so governments can control people by either the George Orwell 1984 vision or by the Brave New World, or a combination of both. If I say all lives matter, then I'm condemned as a racist. If an American stands for his country's flag and national anthem, he has to apologize. It's okay to burn the flag, but not to respond with respect to it. In 2020, we were not allowed to go to church to worship, but leftists could burn down a church as a protest. We were not allowed to open our own businesses, but they could loot and destroy our businesses. And the police in America were condemned as racist pigs. But Antifa and BLM mobs could loot and burn shopping malls because they were called protesters, while we were being attacked by the police for peaceful protests. We were not allowed to protest against oppressive COVID-19 lockdown regulations, but the health experts supported the anti-police riots. BLM could riot against racism, burn down whole shopping malls, and it could burn down police stations. You were not allowed to play with your friends and family at the park, but BLM could destroy the park. You were not allowed to protect your monuments and your history, but BLM could graffiti, vandalize, and pull down national monuments. You were not allowed to have an opinion on any of these issues. And if you expressed any opinion other than the mandated mantras of the politically left woke crowd, then you're a racist, bigot, guilty of hate speech, who deserves abuses. In America, you could riot with Black Lives Matter, but if you went to a Trump rally, then COVID-19 magically reappeared as a threat to public health. So it was safe to riot, but it wasn't safe to gather, certainly not for worship. Communism is a mind virus, the most destructive force in history. Fires in the hearts of men was the title of one book. Identity politics seek to define people as a group and pits groups against another. It aims at complete state ownership of your life, where state power supersedes the church. They want to confuse you, divide you, and conquer you. Confuse, divide, and conquer. For centuries, it's been recognized freedom of worship, freedom of religion, freedom of conscience, freedom of opinion, freedom of speech, freedom of the press, freedom of movement, free enterprise are absolutely essential foundations for freedom. You can't interfere with any of them without undermining freedom as a whole. It's a testament to the insidious success of cultural Marxism that all these essential foundations for Western civilization are under relentless attack today, very visibly in Europe. Any attempt to expose the inevitable consequences of these destructive tendencies are shouted down, censored, deleted from any internet platforms. We need to recognize how revolutions work. Reading or remembering George Orwell's ominous warnings in Animal Farm in 1984, which, by the way, were Sedgwick books at school in Rhodesia, and the writings of Alexander Solzhenitsyn, 5 of which are now required reading Sedgwick books in Russia, such as the Gulag Archipelago, and Otto Scott's book Robespierre, Inside the French Revolution, which is the best book on the French Revolution. And when you understand the French Revolution, you understand all revolutions. It's like the prototype. And Robespierre was the prototype which Lenin and Trotsky and Mao Zedong and Mugabe and Castro all followed. I mean, Robespierre is the prototype revolutionary. So when you understand that, it goes a long way to helping you to understand the tactics of guilt manipulation, indoctrination, gaslighting, Stockholm syndrome, which are used to intimidate, bully, and manipulate the masses, to destroy what centuries of Christian sacrifice have so painstakingly built up. You know, it takes a long time to build something. It doesn't take that long to break it down. The word of God commands us, but sanctify the Lord God in your hearts, and always be ready to give a defense to everyone who asks you a reason for the hope that's within you. We've got to be ready to give a reply, ready to give a defense. Nearly 500 years ago, Professor Martin Luther declared, if I profess with the loudest voice and the clearest exposition every portion of the truth of God's word, except precisely that point which the world and the devil are at that moment attacking, then I'm not confessing Christ, however boldly I may be professing him. For where the battle rages, there the loyalty of the soldier is proved. To be steady on all the battlefront besides is mere flight and disgrace if he flinches at that point. It's no good defending the bridge that's not under attack, or the point of the wall that's not under attack. There's some people protecting what's not under attack and ignoring the area that is under attack. The German reformer Professor Martin Luther warned us 500 years ago, I'm much afraid that schools will prove to be wide gates to hell, unless they diligently labor in explaining the Holy Scriptures, engraving them in the hearts of youth. I advise no one to place his child where the Scriptures do not reign paramount. Every institution in which men are not constantly occupied with the Word of God must become corrupt. Now, do you remember there was a time, well, it's before most of our time actually, but there was a time when universities were conservative, universities were Christian, universities were the bastions of civilization. There was a time that you had professors like C.S. Lewis in universities like Cambridge and Oxford. There was a time when university professors were people like Martin Luther, Ulrich Zwingli, John Calvin, Theodore Beza. There was a time when universities were conservative. But now you can see that the university has been hijacked by the left to such an extent that they are able to even kill a conservative voice on their campus, because this is our place now. It belongs to the left. It used to be conservatives controlled the institutions, and the institutions were conservative. Now it's the liberal left that controls, which is why the left has gone from opposing censorship to promoting censorship. And to send your child to a secular university today is child abuse. They will be bullied. They will be intimidated. They may be turned like that chap who's accused of the shooting of Charlie Kirk, Tyler Robertson. He apparently comes from a good conservative Christian family, and yet he could be so radicalized as to express at the dinner table wanting to kill Charlie Kirk, and on social media. And maybe he even is the one who pulled the trigger. Well, I don't believe the official story, but this is a radicalized person who was so changed that his entire family disagreed with him. He disagreed with his entire family to the point of wanting people like Charlie Kirk dead. Alexander Solzhenitsyn said, this generation now coming out of Western schools is unable to distinguish good from bad. Even those words are unacceptable. This results in impaired thinking ability. That's putting it mildly. I mean, aside from these silly girls in the foreground, just look at those posters. What do they have to do with education? Nothing, but they've got a lot to do with indoctrination. Those are idols of the New World Order. We, as Bible-believing evangelical Christians, must respond to all this like Dr. Martin Luther responded at Worms, standing before the assembled political and ecclesiastical might of Europe, before Charles V, Emperor of the Holy Roman Empire. On the 18th of April, 1521, Martin Luther declared, unless I am convinced by Scripture or by clear reasoning that I'm in error, for popes and councils have often erred and contradicted themselves, I cannot recant, for I am subject to the Scriptures I've quoted. My conscience is captive to the Word of God. It is unsafe and dangerous to do anything against one's conscience. Here I stand. I cannot do otherwise. So help me, God. Amen. You shall know the truth, and the truth will make you free. It also might get you prosecuted in Britain and deplatformed off quite a few social media platforms. But where the Spirit of the Lord is, there is liberty. Stand fast, therefore, in the liberty by which Christ has made us free. Do not be entangled again by the yoke of bondage. And wokeism is a bondage. It's a new religion. Scripture alone is the ultimate authority. We should smash cultural Marxism. What we're seeing in the wokeness is a new religion, and it's basically Marxism in a secular disguise. Now, you'll find on our Frontline Mission, sa.org website, many audio and video presentations such as this that you can go to under audio video gallery, and you will find this presentation will be uploaded in the next couple of days.